Hey guys, welcome back to my art desk. Today we are unboxing the August 2023 Paleful Packs box and making some art with whatever we find inside. So let's get started. Ooh, look at that. Oh, I'm so excited about this. Okay, so this is, I believe the brand is pronounced Core, and it is a watercolor set. We have 6 earth colors, and it looks like they come in tubes. I'm gonna open this package up real quick. These are the tubes of paint that come in the case here. That's a lot of watercolor. I know the tube looks small, but watercolor goes a really long way. So we have a Naples yellow, a Venetian red, transparent brown oxide, indigo, raw umber, and a sap green. So very earthy watercolors. All right, let's see. Ooh. Okay, we have a watercolor pad, cold press, which means it's going to have some texture to it. This is 4 by 8 inches, 140 pounds, 300 GSM, 30 sheets. I've never seen a watercolor pad this size before, like this shape. That's so interesting. Looks like we also have 2 watercolor brushes. This is a Filbert size 6. The other one we have is, looks like a round brush size 1. Alright, so this is what I am working with from the Paleful Packs box. It might not look like a lot, but these are really good quality watercolors and good quality watercolor paper, so the value is still there even though it's not in volume. They're really good art supplies. So I'm going to find my prompt list and see what kind of art we're going to be making today. Okay, so the 4 prompts that I'm going to be doing is Globe, Breathe, American Southwest, and Forgotten. So we're going to have to come up with some ideas because I'm not really sure what I want to do for any of those prompts yet. Alright, so this is just a different piece of watercolor paper, just something a little bit bigger that I can play around with. Alright, so I'm going to squeeze just a little bit out into my palette here. Oh my goodness. That one was full to the top. Oh, I gotta get the lid back on before that explodes. The good thing about watercolor is that even if there's too much here and it dries, you can just reactivate it with more water. Okay, we're going to be gentle with this next one. Try not to get it all over me. Maybe I should do this over the pan. You know what I should do? I should fill up some watercolor pans while I'm at it. Because if these are going to explode all over me, I might as well save them in the pan. That I finished all 4 of my prompts with the paint that I just put on this pan. I didn't squeeze out any extra paint and I still have a ton left over. So that'll kind of give you an idea of how far you can make this paint stretch. That's why I was so surprised when I opened up the tin how many tubes we got and the size of the tubes, because that's really a lot of watercolor paint. So I was really happy with that. When I'm testing the pigments out, I am checking to see the pigment load once I water it down, how well it still shows its vibrancy and the color difference between the paint straight from the tube versus when I add a lot of water to my brush and drag it out to kind of see what values I have to play with, and just testing the different colors out just to see the palette that I'm working with. All of these colors are really earthy, but you can see we still have quite the rainbow to work with. This little test really shows the difference of pigments. Not all watercolor pigments are created equal. Some of them are much more opaque than others. So some of them straight out of the tube won't cover that black line. Some of them do. It doesn't mean anyone is better than the other. It's just how they're made. Now I'm playing around with mixing the watercolors, so my blues and reds, greens and yellows, and just kind of seeing the large range that I can get with just these 6 colors, just based on how much water I add and the different percentages of blues to reds that I'm adding into each mixture. I could literally probably do this all day and not come up with the same color twice. So the first prompt was globe. I decided to do a cross cut of the Earth so you could see both east and west hemispheres at the same time. So I started off just by tracing a couple circles and doing a rough outline where all of the continents were going to be. From there, I went to using a wet on wet technique, which is where you wet anywhere that you want the paint to flow, and then you come back in and add the paint to the wet areas. And when I do this, it lets the paint flow so that more pigment is left in certain areas than others, so it's not just one flat, smooth, even color. And I think it makes something like this a little bit more interesting. So instead of the land masses looking just two-dimensional, it almost looks like there is mountains and valleys, almost like a satellite view. Once the land masses are done, I use that same technique to paint the water of the globe. So I'm just wetting the whole area, dropping some blue pigment down, letting it flow, and going back and touching up, adding a little bit more pigment where I think it's needed, but overall not being too tight with where I am putting the paint, because that's kind of the beauty of watercolor, is its translucency and also the fluidity of it. So rather than fighting the nature of watercolor, I'm trying to work with it. After that layer is dry, I'm using that indigo and making a dark blue background for our globe and adding a little bit more color variation to the land masses and ocean until I'm happy with the result. This next prompt was the word breathe, and so I wanted to do something a little bit more light and airy. So I chose to paint some big puffy clouds at sunset. I'm keeping all of my colors very light at first because I don't want to go too dark too fast, because I can't lighten any of the paint once it's down. So for this particular painting, I will be building up the colors very gradually. I also don't want any stark whites. I want to keep everything very soft. So I'm using soft yellows and soft pinks and purples to add a little bit more interest to the clouds. At first, everything is about the same tone. It's all very light, and the clouds don't really pop out until I start adding in the darker colors of the trees and the dark sky above the clouds. And it's the contrast between the lightest areas and the darkest areas that really makes the painting pop. So like I said, I don't take any of the areas super dark to begin with. I just keep building those layers of different variations of color and different tones until I'm happy with how it's looking. Once those layers are all dry, I'm adding in a little electric wire and a couple of little birds sitting on it and flying in the sky. Prompt number 3 is American Southwest, which I don't really have a lot of real life inspiration from. I've never been there, but I do love the vibe of like a vintage Route 66. So to keep with that vintage feel, I cut my paper down to about the size of a Polaroid and taped off the edges so I would have nice clean lines at the end. And I'm using that wet on wet technique again, this time adding the paint for the general areas of my subject instead of going in with a sketch. I'm starting off with a looser picture of what I'm going for, and then as I'm adding my darker colors, I'm going to refine it more and more. So if you can tell by now, I am painting a motel sign from the American Southwest. I wanted it to look like it had been there for a really long time. I wanted it to look rusty and dusty and sun-faded with some golden canyons in the background. I'm building up my shadows on the sign, starting off lighter and then adjusting and making them darker after each layer. This one was pretty simple, but I actually really like the way that it turned out, and I'm really glad that I cut the paper down and taped it off the way that I did, because I think that overall it makes the paper also part of the artwork, which I think is pretty cool. Moving on to the fourth and final prompt for this month, the prompt word was forgotten. So I thought it would be really fun to do like a loose watercolor urban sketch of an abandoned house. I decided to keep the paper vertical because I wanted to do a tall house with some nice greenery around it.
And I wanted the overall building to be a little bit wobbly, not something super structured, because it is a forgotten house and it is a little bit dilapidated. So I started off by blocking in the larger shapes with the watercolor, and then I will refine it later on. I actually ended up using a fine liner, which didn't come in the box, but I thought this is the last prompt. I want to add a fine liner into it, and I can do that because it's my art. So I'm using that fine liner to go in and define all of the details of the house that are too small to really add in with the watercolor. Then I chose to go back in with more watercolor and kind of define everything a little bit more, add more shadows and more color variation now that I have a really good base. At the last minute, I decided to add some caution tape and some wooden boards over the windows just to make it seem a little bit more forgotten and abandoned. And I used a white gel pen to add a little ghosty in the top window as well as some cracks in the windows. And there you have it, the 4 final paintings for this month's Palette Packs box. I'd love it if you'd leave a comment down below, let me know which one was your favorite. And if you enjoyed watching, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and consider subscribing so you don't miss the next video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped you get some creative juices flowing. Now go make some art and I will see you next time.